All right, everybody. Hey, welcome back. This is Beetle Beast. We're going to do part 2 of our small aircraft, our Cessna 172 navigation tutorial. This part here, we're going to be starting kind of where we left off in Jackson, Mississippi, moving our way over to Meridian, Mississippi, Mike Echo, India. We've already got the departure and destination airports loaded up. We do need to go into our EFB and select our route of flight. So if you watched the last video, we went from Laurel, Mississippi up to Jackson, Mississippi, and we used GPS navigation for that, pink needles or magenta needles for that entire leg of navigation until we got to the approach, at which point in time we shot an ILS approach. This time around, we're going to do it just slightly differently. We're going to be flying via short-range navigation or green needles all the way from Jackson over to Meridian. Now, let me take a peek here at the Meridian Airport. There should be, I know that there's an ILS for runway 1, but we did an ILS last time, so we probably should have done everything the first time as being long-range navigation, and then we could have done just the ILS approach or a short-range navigation approach over here at Meridian. But instead, maybe we'll do the RNAV approach. There's an RNAV for runway 1. So we're going to fly over on short-range nav and then shoot RNAV. Yeah, why not? We can do that. That'll be fun. It'll be different. It'll be something else. And it looks like it's an LPV, so we have LPV and LNAV, VNAV minimum, so we should be able to shoot this and engage the VNAV function, which I didn't get to demonstrate in the previous version of the approach with the 172. Like I might have mentioned in my previous video, there are other tutorials that I've made up that do show VNAV navigation. They're just in jet aircraft, specifically in the Citation CJ4, but you could take a peek at that if you want to see some information on how to shoot RNAV approaches and how VNAV functions, but we're going to do the same thing here. So let's go ahead and load up our flight plan into the EFB. Step 1, of course, we've got Jackson Airport in here as the departure. We have the destination airport of Meridian, Mississippi in here. We will not have a direct route, but we're going to add in first a fix. So we're going to use the, see here, it is the Magnolia VOR, which is Mike Hotel Zulu, I think. Magnolia. We'll add that fix to our route, and then we're going to go ahead and add a second waypoint. This time it's going to be an airway once again. Oh, let's see if it finds it. Airway. So, it just didn't show up yet. There were apparently too many of them, and it was loading all of them. Okay. Victor 18 is what we're going to use, and it's going to go all the way over. Heck, we can take it all the way over to Meridian, which is MEI. We'll add that. Now we have all of the fixes along that route of flight. Noyag, Fannin, Enake, it looks like should be next. Yep. And then we've got Kunev and Meridian. It looks like Habji's actually shows up on that exact same route of flight. I know Habji was the fix for the ILS approach over there. It doesn't show up here, which is interesting, but it does show up as being on this same route in, and you could use it for that ILS arc at Meridian. Anyway, we're not going to worry about that one. And then when it comes to the approach, we're not going to do a VFR approach. We're going to do this as the RNAV runway 1. And let's see here, RNAV 1. Looks like it only has AXUP is the only fix. So I guess we'll be going out to AXUP and shooting the approach from there. Change procedure, that should work. We'll lower this altitude again, just like I told you earlier. It doesn't work if you have 10,000 feet in there. We're not going that high. File it with ATC. And send it to the avionics. Perfect. We can close that up as we're now done. I'm going to make one quick change here on the weather. I know the weather's good, the winds are good, but I want to take these clouds and lower them down just a little bit once again. Something around there. And with that, let's click the button. So obviously we have a little bit less discussion for the initial brief here, because you guys should have an idea of what we did. Like I said, this is part 2 of the video. If you watched part 1, you have an idea as to exactly what we're going to do. The real differences here, though, is we are going to be using VOR navigation to get from where we're at to where we're going. And I know that there's a tutorial about it, and the tutorial that does, I said VFR, VOR or VORTAC navigation. The tutorial that does VORTAC navigation literally just has you intercept. It doesn't even have you really intercept a course, but it has you kind of intercept. I guess you kind of do. You make one turn and then you follow a needle to the VOR. Well, we're going to start off doing that exact same thing. But let's just say, well, let's see if we can turn more of these lights down. Come on now. Nobody flies around like this. Nor quite that dark either. That's the pedestal. We need like a little bit of light. Normally there's a glare shield light on here and I don't see it. Maybe it was right. No, that's fuel shut off. Could have sworn there used to be one down here. That does not look like a glare shield light. And the other ones used to be right over here. Anyway, they apparently have moved those. Standby instrument, pedestal, panels. Yep, pedestals down below. Standby instrument, that's fine. Avionics. Oh, yep, I just don't see it. Okay, so we'll have to use a little bit of overhead. I want to have at least some itty bitty baby bit of light. That'll do. Anyway, the glare shield lighting used to be right under here. It probably really exists. Just don't see it right now. Not going to worry about it. Okay. Like I said, we're going to be leaving off Magnolia. VOR is going to be our first fix. We're going to fly up to Magnolia. Then we're going to fly to the east on that Victor 18. And we'll be using the VOR for all of our points. So we'll talk about when we cross a point based off of that. Let's go ahead and set up our initial altitude, 5,000 feet. And we'll turn on our flight director. Increase that pitch attitude. We know that it takes about 9 degrees nose up, 10 degrees nose up in order to achieve our VY speed of 74 knots. So something right around there. That looks pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of seeing those little blue lines, so let's get rid of those. Oh, and I said we wanted to do this in short-range navigation. So let's make that swap over happen as well. So we're going to come over to the button that says CDI. We're going to click that. Now we're seeing the localizer in here for, oh, it's actually the localizer. We don't want the local. We want 113.2, which would be the frequency for the VORTAC Magnolia. We'll swap that over, 13.2. There's VOR1, and we should be able to center it up on the course. If you come over here and do a left and right click at the same time, your course centers up. So that's the course you need to fly in order to get directly to Magnolia at this time. And our flight plan is going to take us directly to Magnolia, and then we're going to be flying outbound on Magnolia. Looks like the 094 degree radial outbound from the VOR. That's what we're going to do. All right. Hopefully no one has any questions. If you do, put them in the comments. Let's go ahead and get ourselves started. Oh, one more thing I want to have up before we go. PFD options, DME on, DME sources number 1. That's exactly what I want to look at. So we're going to use that as we fly outbound. Eventually we're going to switch over to the Meridian VOR, and we're going to fly the Meridian VOR inbound. Should be pretty straightforward. Okay, we're all set. Ready to go. All right, we've increased our power. Airspeed is alive. Just like always, 55 knots, slight back pressure. Nice gradual pitch up. And a little bit less. I'm going to go ahead and pitch sync, drop that nose right back down there. It's about 9 degrees. And we're going to the VOR. Let's start turning towards it. Flaps are coming up. Making that slight right turn. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to sync up to the nav mode of our autopilot system to make the flight director follow the VOR navigation. So now the goal is to get that little course in the middle. I'm not going to follow the flight director all the way over. I just don't want it to have the big turn to try to grab the VOR and then have it turn so drastically back. Because as you can tell, the VOR is coming in. We're going to be getting closer to it, so the closer we get to the VOR, the more difficult it is to actually cross those radios there for a few seconds. So it might come in kind of quick here, but shouldn't take too long, and that's going to center up, and as soon as it does, there you go. That flight director is going to come right back in, and we'll start making our way ever so slightly over towards the VOR radio that will be flying inbound. It looks like we're on about it's the 171, 172, I guess technically, radio outbound from the VOR. We're tracking inbound on a 352 course. That's the radio we're trying to intercept to go inbound to the VOR. And then, like I said, we're going to end up making a right turn and flying the 094 radio outbound from the VOR. So if you go through the tutorial, they don't mention some of that VOR, I wouldn't say phraseology, but the VOR nomenclature that's displayed on the CDI. So if you look, you've got a green arrow. Of course, it has a point on the front of it. That is the direction that you essentially have tuned in. So you're tuning one of 360 radials off of a VOR or a VORTAC. So in this case here, we're tuning the 352 radial. And what we're trying to do is to keep that needle in the center, meaning we're going towards that VOR. Directly above the little airplane in the center of the CDI, as you see circled, has an arrow that is going forward. That means that you are currently going towards that VOR. If you had it going in the opposite direction, you're now going away from the VOR. So basically it's telling you if your needle is pointed towards the VOR, if your needle is going to be pointed away from the VOR. As we fly outbound, that little arrow is going to appear in the opposite direction, facing behind us, saying that the VOR is now behind us and we're tracking outbound on the 094 degree radial, which will be our airway. Currently about 4 miles away from the VOR, according to our DME, just to the bottom left of the CDI. And we're going to keep flying in this direction until we reach that zone of confusion. And that's the point where we start getting very close to the VOR. The needle readings will become very erratic. They can swing from left to right as you have the ability to cross multiple radials at a single time. As you get very close to the VOR, the radials start getting really, really close together. So when that starts to happen, you basically want to hold the heading that you're on and continue on it as if nothing's changed. If you start making adjustments to it, trying to chase the needles, you're going to end up with some, I don't want to say some funky variation, but you're going to start trying to chase yourself off course, and the needles are going to start looking really strange really quickly. So don't worry about that. You just kind of keep following the same path that you were originally on, and it's going to lead you right to where you were going. So we're coming up on about 100 feet to go to our level off at 5,000 feet. There's our outs. 2.7 miles from the VOR. And there's out. Airplane's going to go ahead and start accelerating. Trying to trim it out so that it'll want to stay there, and then we'll eventually get an autopilot on, just because if you're flying this thing in a long cross country, even if you're doing 70 miles, odds are you're probably going to turn on the autopilot. But it seems pretty well established right there. So we're going to go ahead, autopilot on. Autopilot's now on. Here comes our next track to 094 degrees. Come over here, we're going to grab our course. Nine 3094. And instead of letting it go all the way over, because I don't think it's going to intercept it properly, I'm going to go to a heading mode and hold it about right there. We'll let that course come in, re-intercept the nav function, and let it fly outbound on the 094. You can see that arrow now is behind us. Here comes the course. Nav's engaged, VOR mode's on, and it's going to go ahead and continue flying outbound now on the 094. So we're currently just east of the VOR, and we're going to be flying outbound. Our first waypoint that we'll cross will actually be the Noyig waypoint. You can bring it up in your flight plan. If you were to bring it up here, there's Noyig. It tells you what the distance is from Noyig. I'm going to close it up. It also shows up here because you still have the GPS navigation showing. Those lights are just a bit annoying. Let's go ahead and turn that one off for now. Because you have the GPS navigation on, it shows that you're on the leg, MHZ to Noyig, 6 miles to go. The distance is going to be 8 DME from the fix that we were just at, which is MHZ, Magnolia VOR. So when this down here shows 8 DME, you know that you've reached that point. So a relatively straightforward version of nav. It's, like I said, it's just old school. It's a little more complicated because it's using ground-based navigation. You're having to tune in radio frequencies, and then you have to do the actual twisting yourself. You have to know where you're going. So in order to do this, I would really recommend having a chart up. Otherwise, it makes significantly more sense if the aircraft's equipped to fly with the GPS, fly with the GPS. But if we take a look over here to our right, I mean, heck, we're right on the course. That shows up basically perfect. So that's how people navigated before we were using GPS to get everywhere. Humorous story on that. When I first started flying airliners, we had aircraft that were only equipped with one GPS receiver. And as a result of having one GPS receiver, the other pilot who was flying, the pilot who was monitoring, was required to monitor the airways. So you literally had a chart out, and this was before we had iPads on airplanes. So you sat there with a paper chart, and you checked it along the route of flight to make sure that you're actually crossing these waypoints at the waypoint in the DME on the radial that it said you should be on. And you checked it to verify the entire time. You know, it was kind of humorous. It was very much kind of felt old school. But gosh, we flew all around the country with that. So we're not too far away, 2.6 miles or so. And we'll be hitting that first waypoint. Like I said, that one there was Noyig. And then Fannin is going to be just another 4 miles after that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really want to talk about, because, I mean, we're really going to look at this exact same thing for the majority of our time here. And I know I've already gone through kind of an overview of the way the avionics work over here on the left-hand side of your G1000 panel. So you should have an idea so far as to how you can function the autopilot, the different modes, heading, navigation. Like I said, it's all in that previous, slightly longer tutorial that I posted earlier today. But yeah, there's really not a lot that I want to cover when it comes to any of that data. So I think we'll fly a couple more waypoints, and then we're going to make a shortcut. We're going to make the right-hand turn, and we're going to go over towards the IAF for the arrival, for the approach, because I can't think of any reason to show you that we're reaching waypoints. There's 8 miles. That's our next waypoint. There we go. Now, as I said, we got 4 miles to the next one. So at 12 DME, we will have reached Fannin. So yeah, after Fannin, I'm going to make a right-hand turn, and we're going to make a shortcut. There's no reason to fly for another, oh gosh, I don't know, 40 miles, 50 miles on one airway just going there. We can fly direct to the next point. And in fact, if nothing changes, we'll have the the joy of cinema, and I'll just cut out some of the middle part, and you guys would not have to worry about seeing the boringness of just flying around and looking at instruments. So let's see, there was one item that I didn't talk about here. It's this little piece right here, and if you're new to aviation, I will tell you something about the transponder. So the transponder is a code that is used for ATC to identify aircraft that are flying. Every airplane that's flying on an IFR flight plan gets a unique code. VFR aircraft all squawk 1200 in the United States, at least. I have no idea what it is in Europe. I haven't dealt with that, and whenever I've flown internationally anywhere else, it's always been on an IFR flight plan, so we always had a unique squawk. But essentially, the way the transponders work, radar from the ground will pick up what you call a primary return, which is the radar sends out a radar wave hits something, it reflects back to the radar dish that's sending out the original signal, and allows ATC to see, hey, there's something there, there's an object there. So ATC will call that primary return. So they'll get aircraft that don't have a transponder on board, they'll be able to see a primary. They won't get heading, they won't get altitude, but they'll see a blip on the radar screen, knowing that there is something there. They'll also pick up birds on it, specifically large flocks of birds. Those will get a radar return, and ATC will say, hey, I've got a primary return. It's very slow moving. I'm assuming it's birds, but it's in this vicinity. All right, we've already reached that point. We're going to go ahead and make that turn. So let's go off to MEI. Nope, keep going. Here's our arrival. Let's go direct to that fix. Enter. Activate, go back to our CDI, nav it. Here comes our right turn, and we're going to the fix. We are now 60 miles. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and accelerate this here in just a second for you guys. But we'll finish talking about transponders. So that's how a primary radar return works from a transponder. Well, if you're flying an IFR flight plan, and you're trying to communicate with ATC, and ATC needs to talk to you and identify where you are specifically so that they can rapidly identify you, see what's going on, they will give you a transponder code. That is this little 2753. If you're working through the career mode of Flight Sim 2024, or even doing any of the free flight, and you're using ATC services, they're going to tell you to squawk a specific code. If you use VATSIM, they're going to tell you to squawk specific codes. And that's going to be done here in this transponder button. And then you can put in this button that says code, and you will have the ability to type in a 4-digit code that they request from you, and it will change what that is so that you show up on either the VATSIM radar or to the fake ATC of Microsoft Flight Sim as that aircraft. So that's the gist of how transponders work. They didn't really explain that in this tutorial, so I thought I'd just go ahead and talk about that right now. Maybe that'll help somebody out in the future who's a little confused as to what that transponder actually is and what they're trying to say. So XPDR is what you hit. There's your code. You can type in your code from here. Also, a couple more things. There's VFR button. That'll put in 1200 automatically. If you're on the ground, you can actually put it into standby mode, which essentially means that this transponder is not going to be pushing out any information. If you put it to on, it's going to give a primary return essentially saying who you are, but it will not give them any altitude and coding information. So if you want them to see what altitude you're actually flying around at, you need to have the out button pressed as well. So out is what you use whenever you're airborne. Like I said, VFR, this is squawk 1200, just a quick press button. Code, so you can input your own code. This ident button, if you click it, you see the word ident pop up and populate behind the code that you have in the transponder. That alerts ATC to the fact that it basically makes you brighter on their radar scope. So it's not uncommon if ATC has numerous aircraft, they're trying to quickly identify where you're at. They'll say Cessna, whatever the heck our call sign is, Cessna 123 Bravo Alpha, ident. You click ident. Or if you've just taken off and they're first trying to identify where you're at, they'll say squawk this code and ident, at which point in time you click squawk, you ident. They'll say your radar contact 2 miles south of the Meridian Airport, 3,200 feet. And you'll say, Roger, this is Cessna 123 Superman. We are 3 miles south. We're at 3,200 feet, climbing to 5,000 feet. They'll say, Roger. And that's the end of it. So that's what the ident button does. You don't really need it. You probably won't use it much at all inside of here, but just wanted to say that's where it's at. If you notice, it's also on the main page screen. You don't even have to hit the transponder button in order to get to it, just because it's useful almost at all times. All right, that's all good. Let's talk about this approach real quick, and then we will essentially time skip. So we're going over to Meridian. We're going to do this RNAV runway 1 approach. It is a final approach course of 11 degrees, 1,800 feet at Marvin, down to an LPVDA of 489 feet, which is a 200-foot RNAV GPS approach. Touchdown zone is 289 feet. There is a TAA, safe altitude area of 30 nautical miles from the IFIAF, so basically around Akzub. We're currently going to Akzub. Our altitude when we cross it will be 2,700 feet. That is going to be 2,700 feet for the course reversal to fly back inbound. We'll have to do one loop around as we turn in that course reversal to the 011 degree radial and fly inbound from there. And that just has to do with the angle at which we're coming in to the facility. 011 inbound down to 1,800 feet at Marvin, like I already said. That'll be the final approach fix, and then we'll be flying all the way down to our 489-foot DA. RVR, 2,400 feet. Basically, we need a half-mile visibility in order to shoot the approach. And let's see, there could be a couple of notes on here. RVR 1,800 is authorized if you have a flight director, which we do in this airplane, so we could actually take that down to 1,800 RVR. And there is a visual descent point 1.4 nautical miles from the runway. So I have to keep that in mind. If we do not have, if we end up too high, that is the point on which we can make a visual approach to a landing. It shouldn't be an issue with us doing this as a LPV approach. If we were shooting this as simply an LNAV approach and we descended down to an MDA of 780 feet, it would be important to note that if you were still at 780 feet and you're inside of that VDP, you may not be able to make a safe approach down. Same time, if you're outside of the VDP point, you don't want to start descending away from your minimums at that point or prior to it, because there could be an obstacle inside of that area that is going to cause you trouble. Threshold crossing height is going to be 55 feet. If we have to go missed, climb straight ahead to 800 feet, climbing left turn to 3,000. We go direct to the Poly D intersection and hold there. Obstacles off to the west, 1689, very near Paul D and the hold. That's it. Let's get on with our flight. All right. Apparently my mic was muted, so I didn't get to talk about it. I had already lowered our altitude down to 2,700 feet. As we approached the Todd, the aircraft was able to start making that initial descent down to 2,700 feet. It had already calculated out a 600 foot per minute descent. I feel like an idiot for the fact that apparently I muted myself. My apologies. I've talked to no one for the last 30 seconds. But here we are. We're leveling off at 2,700 feet. The approach path does show up right there, as you can see. And now we're going to be flying outbound for the course reversal at Akzub. And like I said, this has to do with the angle at which we're approaching Akzub from. You have to fly in, do a circle or a course reversal to get yourself aligned with the final approach course, which is 11 degrees. So that's what's happening right now as we fly outbound at this 2,700 foot altitude. You did get a chance to see the RNAV, or sorry, the VNAV function in work. Unfortunately, you just didn't get to hear me dictate it. But that's what was going on. It's going to happen again here because we are going to be flying this with the VNAV on for this entire approach. So you're going to see it again. But that's what just happened. And that's where we're going. So now we're going to have this little course reversal. It's going to fly this outbound path and then come back around and re-intercept the final approach course. And we'll speed it up one notch. That 1 notch of speed up is going to probably confuse it as it tries to intercept that course coming inbound. The autopilots are not designed to work at increased speeds like that. It really confuses the system, and you start getting some really funky intercepts. Okay, so now we're going inbound on the course. We're going to go ahead and arm our approach mode. See if I can find it. There it is. All right, so now what was our V path has changed to GP, which is a glide path. That's what we're going to be using for the rest of the way inbound on the approach. We can set our altitude down to, it probably won't let it go all the way to the other bottom. Nope, it doesn't. It's just going down by hundreds of feet. So I'm going to go ahead and set the missed approach altitude, 3,000 feet. This little glide slope that shows up here, this little diamond, it's going to work its way down just like the ILS does, and that's going to be what we follow the rest of the way in for the approach. As we pass AXUB, I also expect this altitude here to change and drop down to 1,800 feet. And when it does, we'll let the airplane descend. Once again, we have the VNAV already armed. We had the VNAV armed, and apparently it's now angry and gone off. Let's see if I can get that back. Nope, it's now angry. It's gone. All right, we got the glide path there. We'll keep the glide path. We'll see if that one shows back up. It may not do the initial descent now down to 1,800 feet. And I don't see a Todd in front of us, so we will see kind of what happens. The fact that the altitude doesn't show up here makes me think it's not going to make that initial descent down to 1,800. But I have been wrong before, so we'll see if that happens again. Yep, so as I said, nothing's happened. We did have the chevron show up for the descent path, so it knows it. Oh, we do have a Todd though in front, so that's good. So we have a Todd. I imagine that that altitude is going to populate up here as we approach the Todd, because last time around it didn't show up until very near the time we actually approached it. And it looks like here it's just going to be the glide path, and that's what's coming in. So we got 1 dot on it. Start pulling our power back a little bit so we don't have to struggle so hard to slow down. Get in 1 notch of flaps. And I think I'll fly it again from Marvin inbound. And we'll see if it's as crummy and windy as it was on the last time we flew this. All right, there's our 1,800 feet, which is the altitude minimum at Marvin. Glide path is just intercepted, and we're going to start making that descent down. We will hit Marvin at that 1,800 feet. It's guaranteed here at that point. Looks like the runway's already inside here, so weather's clearly a little bit better than it was on the last leg. Slow it down a little more. We'll get our 2nd notch of flaps in. Just inside of 2 miles from Marvin. And I kind of had a feeling we were probably going to be able to see the runway a little bit better. The last time we were doing this, it was during the daytime. The approach lights aren't on, and you will notice it is significantly easier to see an airport during IFR conditions at night. It's simply easier because you've got approach lights, you've got PAPI lights, you've got runway lights, you've got reels. It becomes significantly easier to pick out and discern an airport at nighttime than it is during the day. Just kind of the nature of the beast. So at this point, you know that it's basically a visual approach. We're going to be following the guidance in. If you want to make it look like it would be a real ILS, you can just, or not an ILS, but a real RNAV approach. You can put your head down, and then you can fly based off of just the needles all the way into the runway. Autopilot's off. And we are going to be making a descent. Sorry, that was me looking down at something else. Down to 489 feet. So we got about 1,000 feet to go above the minimums right now. So it flies essentially like an ILS approach. You've got what would appear to be a localizer, but it's not. It is just GPS navigation, giving us lateral navigation. And then you have a glide slope that is being provided by, once again, GPS navigation. So you have some funkiness here, some bumps and turbulence on this descent down, kind of like we had the last time. I said we're going down to 489 feet. But if you fly this almost identical to the way you fly the ILS approach that we talked about earlier and that you saw in the previous tutorial, it's really a non-event. Got just a little bit low. Right on the course, though. All right, and I'm going to peek my head up. Can't really see anything because we're kind of bouncing around a bunch. It would appear that we might have had that at a slight increase of speed because now I think we're at the normal rate. All right, and power's out. Pull the nose off a little bit. And we have arrived. All right, so that's a flight towards Meridian. So now you've seen conventional ground-based navigation as well as GPS navigation. You've seen VOR, or sorry, you've seen ILS's conventional approaches, and you've now seen VOR GPS approaches. If you've got questions, please put it in the comments. Like the video if you do, if you want to. I appreciate you guys watching them. That's always a joy. It's also a joy whenever you see new subscribers added to the channel. So thank you guys very much. I do enjoy playing this game and sharing my aviation knowledge. You know, I used to instruct people how to fly airplanes. I don't do that very much anymore. And while I can say in some ways, shapes, and forms, I do miss instructing, this is a nice, kind of cool way, kind of chill way for me to be able to share some of that with another side of the community that either does spend time flying airplanes in real life and or those who don't, and they really just kind of enjoy gaining more knowledge about how airplanes work and how people do the job and navigate airplanes around. So I find that kind of fun, kind of cool, and it's always fun to share knowledge. So like I said, if you've got comments or questions, please throw them in the comments there. Otherwise, we appreciate you watching. And hopefully I'll make another video. If you've got something else you guys would like to see, throw that in the comments too, and we can definitely look at making another video if it'll help somebody else play this video game a little bit better for themselves, or a little bit more accurately, depending on what it is that you're really trying to do. All right. Well, thank you guys, and happy simming. We'll see you soon.